Everything is at her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out and I find a mark, I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Halyna Hutchins' father said recently, "It is clear to me Baldwin fired the shot from his hand, so it's hard for me to understand how he cannot be held partly responsible." The fact that the scene was merely a rehearsal is another aspect stressed by Halyna's 61-year-old father. Because the camera wasn't even rolling, it wasn't necessary to fire anything. It wasn't even in the script. That's been highlighted by the script supervisor, Mamie Mitchell, as well. Halyna's father also told the son, "I can't understand the behavior of Alec." And did you know Halyna's husband is a lawyer? Has Matt Hutchins had a change of heart since this headline appeared on the cover of the New York Post? And that was on October the 24th. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, hit the bell for notifications, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So Halyna's father turns out to be a submarine captain, in other words, ex-military, and that means he's got military nous, right? And just think about these words that he said. He said, "And why did he fire the shot during the preparations?" That's, in other words, in the rehearsal. He says, "The revolver is the type of gun which doesn't shoot before the trigger is pressed, and Alec is partially guilty for causing that shot." As I say, Halyna's father is ex-military. He served not only on a military submarine, but as a captain, and that was for the Navy in the Ukraine. Military men, more than most, understand how questionable, perhaps even ludicrous and dangerous, the claim that a gun went off without pulling the trigger can be. He is a man in a position, think about it, a submarine captain, a man in a position also in charge of weapons and familiar with protocols. It is a valid question. You know, imagine how excuses like that, "Oh, the gun went off, it wasn't me." Imagine how excuses like that play off, might go over in the military or police force, anywhere in the world. And so I don't think it is a valid question if Baldwin did nothing wrong. And if he believed he did nothing wrong, why did he delete several tweets after it came to light that the incident happened during a rehearsal? It wasn't even necessary. And just think of a scenario where you discharge the weapon, whether it's got blanks or not. You discharge the weapon in a non-rehearsal. You're now potentially going to have to give the gun back to the armorer for rechecking, and if a live blank has been used, for reloading. I do think it would be good to know which tweets were deleted, what they said, how many there were, and when they were deleted. Obviously, Halyna's father is suggesting something happened, someone knew something, and it's been covered up. This is a case where one has to be careful what one does in the aftermath. In other words, that it doesn't overshadow the actual incident. The shooting may or may not have been negligent and without deliberate intent, but covering one's tracks, that is deliberate, that is intentional, and so legally it can become a bit of a tightrope, even a bit of a minefield. Halyna's father's recent campaign may be intended to win some sort of compensation, some sort of financial settlement, perhaps from Baldwin. And that brings us to the next point. This is actually a U-turn. The father of Halyna's father has actually previously forgiven Baldwin, kind of said that he doesn't blame him. And that was really 2 or 3 days after the incident, 2 months after the incident now. It feels like there has been a U-turn from Halyna's family. As I say, immediately following the shooting on set, Halyna's father was quoted in the news saying, "I don't hold Alec Baldwin responsible." But that was before Baldwin's interview on ABC. That was before it emerged that Baldwin was reluctant to turn over his phone. That was before some people started speculating whether Baldwin was being cooperative by not handing over his phone. Before it was known that Dave Halls, the assistant director, had to be ordered to cooperate with the investigation to answer questions. If Halyna's father, Anatoly, had made a U-turn in recent days, I'm not sure the same can be said for her younger sister, Svetlana, who blasted the Rust armorers for negligence on the same day her father pardoned Baldwin, October 24th. And I do think that's quite an interesting separation. You had the family basically seemingly blaming the armorers, and now you have a situation where more information has come out about the armorers, certainly in yesterday's episode. And now we want to know generally what were the conditions on the set? What were the film bosses? What was their role? In any event, Svetlana said at the time, quoted by Deadline, she said, quote, "How was this negligence allowed by such a team of professionals? This is just such an absolutely absurd coincidence." And I think here she may have been referring to the previous misfires, the previous discharges, the crew walking off set on the same day. She goes on to say, "I don't know where the investigation will lead, but there are so many guesses. God only knows what happened. It's just so incredibly hard to live through. The only thing we want right now is to be there with my mum next to Halyna's husband and their son to make sure he feels our support." It is actually not a bad question at all by Svetlana. Was negligence allowed? Was it permitted? Was there a permissive, reckless approach to mishaps and mistakes? What was the attitude to mishaps and mistakes? How were they countenanced? In the next episode, we'll explore that question in more detail as we deal specifically with the race to hire armorers at a time when there was something like a traffic jam in the low-budget industry. There were incentives out there, and we'll also look at how incentives played out, how they played a role in setting things up, certainly for the Rust crew, like a house of cards. And that brings us to the third and final thing, which I think is quite interesting from a legal perspective. What could be Baldwin's defense? And I think in this respect, one's got to look at the timeline. Baldwin's defense is that although he was a producer on the film, his only role was in the creative stuff. And he's been quite explicit, for example, on ABC, to say that money wasn't something he was keeping tabs on in terms of his role as a producer, and that hiring wasn't something he interfered with or had a say in, except to say that he was appraised of certain staffing decisions. In short, Baldwin's defense seems to be, how was I supposed to know?
In my opinion, no, because I did not observe any safety or security issues at all in the time I was there.
So far, Baldwin has said he wasn't aware of any safety problems. Obviously, there were safety problems. If you have 3 discharges before the actual fatal discharge, that is a problem. And other people did notice safety issues. The fact that somebody died showed that there were safety problems, certainly after the fact. So I don't know about you if you say I didn't know about it. In other words, in a way, pleading ignorance. How was I supposed to know? Baldwin doesn't seem like an ignorant kind of person. He doesn't seem like a passive, inattentive person. Instead, he seems alert, attentive, hypervigilant, assertive, especially on matters that affect him, especially on matters that affect his image. I mean, that is why he went on ABC before the investigation was complete. Because he was attentive, because he was paying attention to what was happening.
The sheriff's department hasn't even released a report to the DA yet. The reason I wanted to sit down with you is because I really feel like I can't wait for that process to end in February, March. I mean, I'm not asking them to speed it up for my benefit. That's ridiculous.
The idea of not wanting to speed up an investigation for his benefit may seem ridiculous, but the idea of speeding up a production for a producer's benefit certainly isn't ridiculous.
When people say cutting costs, I don't say this with any judgment or any cynicism. Spielberg wants to save money. Tom Cruise wants to save money. Everybody who makes movies has a responsibility not to be reckless and careless with the money that you're given.
So trying not to be reckless and careless with money, can that not lead to being reckless and careless with safety? Why? Because safety slows things down. Safety protocols delay filming. When you have a safety announcement, a safety lesson or something like that, that is taking the place of shooting. When you've got everyone present and the clock is ticking, instead of filming, you are having a safety demonstration. That's gobbling up time. So again, if you think about Baldwin going on to ABC to defend his image proactively, that is a person who's attentive, hypervigilant, assertive, hands-on, alert, right? And it's also why he went, when a New York Post reporter engaged him in front of Woody Allen's house, he didn't just stand there with his back to him. He reacted, he responded. It's also why he confronted a Daily Mail photographer on the side of the road with his wife. He didn't just stand there, he confronted him. And why he warned another photographer recently not to scratch his car. Because he's alert. Because he's not ignorant. Even so, it is possible Baldwin didn't know exactly what was going on with the armorers. But even if he did, what can be proven in court? I suppose that may depend on what's on his phone. And I want to conclude by quoting something from the Daily Mail. Anatoli's comments came just days after Baldwin denied, according to the Daily Mail, that he requested a larger Colt gun before he fatally shot Hutchins on the set of Rust on October 21st. Now, where they say requested a larger Colt gun before, it really should be, I think, just before, immediately before, or shortly before. That's not stressed in the article, because the result of that was that Baldwin, again, as I say, hypervigilant, very attentive, noticed this, and he quickly denied that allegation in a tweet last week, Thursday. And that was sent immediately after the Santa Fe sheriffs in Mexico issued a warrant for his phone. Again, quoting from the article, the 63-year-old actor tweeted an article from Newsweek that claimed he had requested a bigger gun before the accidental shooting. Now, I think it's important to note that he's tweeting an article which shows he's read the article, and he's read the article probably on the day that it came out. And so this is what he said. He said, "This, in fact, is a lie." And he said this above the article link. He said, "The choices regarding any props by me for the film Rust were made weeks before production began. To suggest that any changes were made before fatal shooting is false," he added. And I think, again, what he's trying to say is that he doesn't even say it himself. He doesn't stress that what is being said there was that it was made immediately before, that day, or hours or minutes before. He's stretching the time out to say this went on weeks before. And it would be good if he could give a date. When is weeks before? Which month was it? Was it August? Was it July? Was it something he identified in an email, in a photo? Did he decide which prop to use based on photos of guns, or did he actually handle the props? And this, I find Baldwin's strenuous defensiveness here on this particular point worth noting. Baldwin doesn't like the inference that he's requested a bigger gun. Why not? I think the subtext is that he'd requested a bigger gun that day. I'm not saying the subtext is correct. I'm saying what the subtext is. So I think the subtext is that it's implied, it's possible, it's being suggested that he requested a bigger gun that day, or perhaps just before or after lunch. And if that happened, you can imagine the rush, the panic, the furtive and frantic loading of blanks, or blanks that you thought were blanks, and perhaps the failure to check properly by one or two 20-somethings that are fumbling and worried and nervous and new at their jobs, right? And is Baldwin the kind of guy you keep waiting or annoy? Remember, he's the lead actor and the head honcho. The other part is his insistence in a recent tweet that prop choices were made weeks before production began. I find this a little difficult to imagine. It might just be me. Maybe I don't know all the information. I also find it a little bit difficult to understand. We learned yesterday during the previous video that Hannah Gutierrez Reed and Sarah Zachary were hired on September 23rd, that day, and they visited PDQ Arm and Prop LLC the next day, September 24th, their first day on the job. We know the shooting happened less than 1 month later. So how could Baldwin choose a prop weeks ago, in his words, weeks before production began? In his words, if the production was at day 12 into its 21-day schedule on October 21st, in other words, production started on October 6th, as I understand it. If we take the date when Hannah and Sarah went to the prop store for the first time, September 24th, and October 6th as the day the production started, and we assume the day they went was the same day Baldwin saw and approved the props, a Friday, and we include that Friday in our countdown, and we include Wednesday the 6th of October, the day production started in our tally, then we have 13 days. That's not weeks. That's certainly not 2 weeks. And you might say 13 days and weeks is much the same thing. I think you get the picture kind of thing. 13 weeks, 2 weeks, you get the picture. But in reality, accurate timelines are everything in true crime. On the day of the shooting, just 6 hours after, I think 6 union crew were fired and replaced by non-union crew, the so-called accident happened. In terms of Baldwin checking the prop gun, we may be talking about 1 week and a few days. But there's also the scenario to consider where several crew members quit or were fired on the day of the shooting. What was Baldwin's role or response or reaction when this happened? Where was his focus and attention? Was it all on the scene he meant to shoot that day? Was that what he was thinking about? Was that all he was thinking about? And what was Halyna's response to see her co-workers chased off the set? How did she feel? How did she react? What did she say? And didn't a bunch of people getting fired on that day of all days make some other younger crew members nervous and jumpy? And didn't they rush and panic and fumble, perhaps more than they should have, in order to escape censure, in order to avoid being yelled at on a day when tensions had peaked? And so, like the lunch on that fateful day, didn't the mfakane, the expelling, the forced exodus of crew, have an impact in distracting attention, misdirecting focus, diverting energy, and deflecting resources away from the critical details, like checking whether Baldwin's gun was loaded, including perhaps by Baldwin himself? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.